Marcus Chen had always believed that music could speak when words failed. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Seattle, he discovered the piano at age 7 when his grandmother took him to a community center. The old upright piano in the corner called to him, and from that moment his life had a purpose. His family didn't have much money. His father worked double shifts at a warehouse and his mother cleaned offices at night. They couldn't afford proper lessons, but Marcus didn't let that stop him. He watched YouTube videos, borrowed library books about music theory, and practiced on the community center piano every chance he got. The staff there grew fond of the quiet boy who arrived every afternoon with determination in his eyes. By the time Marcus turned 23, he had taught himself to play beautifully. He could hear a song once and recreate it by ear. His fingers moved across the keys with natural grace, pulling emotions from the instrument that made people stop and listen. He started performing at small coffee shops and local events, earning just enough to help his parents with bills. One evening, everything changed when he received an unexpected email. Victoria Ashworth, a wealthy businesswoman known for hosting exclusive social events, had heard him play at a charity function. She was impressed enough to invite him to perform at her annual summer gala. The event would host Seattle's elite successful entrepreneurs, established musicians, and influential socialites. For Marcus, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. He spent weeks preparing for the evening. He selected pieces that showcased his range, from classical compositions to modern arrangements. He practiced until his fingers ached, wanting everything to be perfect. His mother helped him rent a proper tuxedo, and his father drove him to the event in their old sedan, pride shining in his eyes. The Ashworth estate was breathtaking. Marble columns framed the entrance, and crystal chandeliers lit the grand ballroom. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne, and guests wore designer clothes that probably cost more than Marcus earned in a year. He felt out of place immediately, clutching his sheet music as he made his way to the piano positioned near the main hall. As guests mingled, Marcus sat at the grand piano and began to play. He started with a gentle classical piece, letting the music flow naturally. But something felt wrong. People weren't listening. They continued their conversations, their laughter drowning out his carefully practiced notes. He played louder, trying to command their attention, but it only made things worse. A group of young professionals nearby started making comments loud enough for him to hear. A woman in a silver dress laughed and said something about background music being forgettable. A man in an expensive suit smirked and whispered to his companion, glancing toward Marcus with obvious amusement. The pianist felt his confidence crumbling with every whispered joke and dismissive glance. Marcus tried switching to more upbeat pieces, hoping to capture their interest. He played popular songs with complex arrangements, demonstrating his technical skill. But the crowd remained uninterested. Some people turned their backs to him entirely, forming circles that blocked his view of the room. Others pulled out their phones, scrolling through social media while he performed. Then Victoria Ashworth approached the piano. Marcus felt a flutter of hope, thinking she might introduce him properly to her guests. Instead, she leaned down and whispered that perhaps he should take a break. Her smile was polite but cold. She suggested the crowd might prefer a DJ for the rest of the evening, something more suited to their taste. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He nodded silently, his face burning with embarrassment. As he stood up from the piano bench, he heard snickers from nearby guests who had overheard the exchange. Someone made a comment about authentic talent versus amateur hour. Another person laughed and said something about knowing your audience. Marcus gathered his sheet music with trembling hands. He wanted to disappear, to leave immediately and forget this nightmare ever happened. But as he turned to walk away, he caught sight of his reflection in the polished piano. He saw a young man who had worked tirelessly, who had overcome obstacles, who genuinely loved music. And something inside him shifted. He thought about his grandmother taking him to that community center all those years ago. He remembered the countless hours of practice, the calluses on his fingers, the joy he felt when he finally mastered a difficult piece. He thought about the people at the coffee shops who had been moved to tears by his playing, the children who gathered around to watch his fingers dance across the keys. These wealthy guests didn't define his worth. Their dismissal didn't erase his talent or his passion. Marcus made a decision in that moment. He would play one more song, not for them, but for himself. He would play something real, something raw, something that came from the deepest part of his soul. Whether they listened or not didn't matter anymore. Marcus turned back to the piano, his heart pounding against his ribs. The embarrassment still burned in his chest, but alongside it grew something stronger: determination. He placed his sheet music on the stand, then carefully moved it aside. What he was about to play wouldn't need any written notes. He sat down again, and a few guests noticed. The woman in the silver dress rolled her eyes at her companion. A man near the bar chuckled and made a joke about gluttons for punishment. Victoria Ashworth, standing near the entrance to the dining room, looked concerned, probably worried he would embarrass himself further and ruin the sophisticated atmosphere she had carefully created. Marcus closed his eyes and let his hands rest on the keys. He took a deep breath, blocking out the chatter, the clinking glasses, the judgmental stares. He thought about his journey, every struggle and small victory that had brought him to this moment. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. It was a melody he had composed himself during the hardest period of his life, when his father had fallen ill and the family faced crushing medical bills. He had poured all his fear, hope, and love into this piece, playing it late at night in the community center when no one else was around. The melody started simple but contained an aching beauty. Each note seemed to carry weight, emotion, a story that words couldn't tell. Marcus's fingers moved with gentle precision, coaxing sounds from the piano that felt alive. The music spoke of struggle, of watching your parents sacrifice everything for your dreams, of feeling small in a world that seemed designed for others. Something strange began to happen in the ballroom. The conversations near the piano started to fade. One person stopped mid-sentence, turning toward the music. Then another. The melody was impossible to ignore because it wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was simply honest. Marcus's playing grew more confident. His hands moved faster, the melody building in complexity and intensity. He played about the nights he wondered if he was foolish to chase music when he could get a regular job. He played about the moment he realized that giving up would mean losing a part of himself. The music swelled, filled with determination and defiance. More guests turned toward the piano. The woman in the silver dress had stopped talking entirely, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. The man who had made the joke at the bar moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. Even Victoria Ashworth stepped back into the ballroom, her expression shifting from concern to curiosity. The composition moved through different movements, each one revealing another layer of Marcus's experience. He played about joy, those moments when he mastered a piece and felt like he could touch the sky. He played about connection, the strangers who became friends through shared appreciation of music. His whole body swayed with the rhythm, completely absorbed in the performance. The technical skill was undeniable, but that wasn't what held the audience captive. It was the raw emotion, the vulnerability that Marcus poured into every phrase. He played about being underestimated, about people who looked at his thrift store clothes and assumed he had nothing valuable to offer. The music became fierce, almost angry, demanding to be heard. A small crowd had formed around the piano now. People set down their drinks and phones. Some sat on nearby chairs, others stood perfectly still, afraid any movement might break the spell. A woman in the back wiped tears from her eyes, though she couldn't have explained why this music affected her so deeply. Marcus transitioned into a softer section, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. He played about his grandmother, the woman who first showed him that beauty existed in the world even when life was hard. The melody became tender, nostalgic, filled with gratitude. His fingers danced across the keys with such grace that the piano seemed to sing. The young professionals who had mocked him earlier stood frozen, their earlier smugness replaced by something like shame. They recognized, perhaps for the first time, that they had dismissed something precious. The music confronted them with their own superficiality, their tendency to judge based on appearances rather than substance. Marcus played about dreams, about the stubborn hope that refuses to die even when the world says you're not good enough. The music climbed higher, each note building on the last, creating a cascade of sound that filled every corner of the vast ballroom. The crystal chandeliers seemed to sparkle brighter, as if even the light responded to the emotion in the room. He thought about this evening, the humiliation he had felt just minutes ago. But instead of resentment, he channeled that pain into his playing. He transformed it into something beautiful, proving that suffering could be turned into art. The music asked a question. What do you do when the world tells you that you don't belong? The answer came through his fingers. You play anyway. You create anyway. You shine anyway. Marcus reached the climax of the piece, his hands moving in a blur across the keyboard. The music was powerful now, triumphant, declaring that talent and passion would always find a way to break through. Every person in that ballroom felt it, a stirring in their chest that reminded them of their own abandoned dreams, their own moments of doubt and perseverance. The ballroom had transformed into something sacred. Every conversation had ceased. The waiters stood still, trays balanced forgotten in their hands. Even the bartender had stopped pouring drinks, completely captivated by the music flowing from Marcus's fingers. As Marcus played, he entered a state where nothing else existed except the piano and the emotions coursing through him. His eyes remained closed, but he could feel the shift in the room's energy. The dismissive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by something electric and profound. He was no longer performing for an audience. He was sharing a piece of his soul. The melody shifted again, becoming contemplative and questioning. Marcus played about identity, about the struggle to stay true to yourself when the world demands you become someone else. His left hand provided a steady, grounding rhythm, while his right hand explored more complex patterns, creating a conversation between doubt and certainty. An older gentleman near the front, a renowned classical musician named Robert Thornhill, felt his breath catch. He had attended hundreds of performances in concert halls around the world, but this moment in a private ballroom felt more authentic than anything he had experienced in years. The young pianist wasn't hiding behind technical perfection. He was exposing his humanity through music. Marcus's playing grew softer, drawing everyone closer. People unconsciously leaned forward, straining to catch every delicate note. He played about loneliness, those quiet moments when success feels impossibly far away and you question whether anyone will ever truly see you. The music was vulnerable, almost fragile, like a confession whispered in the dark. A young woman named Sarah, who worked in tech and hadn't touched the violin she loved since college, felt tears streaming down her face. She had abandoned her music to pursue a practical career, telling herself that art was a luxury she couldn't afford. Marcus's playing reminded her of everything she had sacrificed, every part of herself she had locked away to fit into corporate expectations. The composition built again, but this time with a different quality. Hope emerged through the minor chords, small but persistent. Marcus played about resilience, about waking up every day and choosing to continue despite the obstacles. His fingers found patterns that suggested light breaking through darkness, possibility emerging from despair. Victoria Ashworth stood near the piano now, her carefully maintained composure cracking. She had built her business empire through ruthless efficiency, cutting away anything soft or sentimental. But this music reached past her defenses, touching something she had buried years ago. She remembered her own dreams before they were replaced by ambition and social climbing. Marcus transitioned into a section filled with gratitude. He played about the people who had believed in him, the community center staff who let him practice for hours, the coffee shop owners who gave him performing opportunities, his parents who supported his dreams even when it meant they went without. The music swelled with appreciation, acknowledging that no one succeeds alone. The man who had made jokes earlier, a venture capitalist named Derek, felt profoundly uncomfortable. He had spent his entire adult life measuring worth through bank accounts and professional titles. He had dismissed Marcus as insignificant because the pianist didn't move in elite circles or wear expensive clothes. But this performance challenged his entire framework for understanding value. Marcus played faster now, his technique flawless but never showy. Every run, every trill, every dynamic shift served the emotional narrative. He played about courage, about standing on stages both literal and metaphorical and refusing to be diminished. The music demanded recognition, not through arrogance but through undeniable excellence. A famous conductor who was visiting from New York pulled out his phone, but not to scroll through social media. He began recording, knowing that capturing even a fraction of this performance would be worth sharing. He recognized immediately that he was witnessing something rare, a musician who had transcended technique to achieve true artistry. The melody moved through shades of emotion like a painter working with an infinite palette. Marcus played about complexity, about how humans contain multitudes and cannot be reduced to simple categories. He played about the wealthy guests in this room, acknowledging their own struggles even as he challenged their initial dismissal of him. The music was generous, offering understanding rather than judgment. Robert Thornhill wiped his eyes discreetly. He had been a harsh critic throughout his career, quick to spot technical flaws and dismiss performers who failed to meet his exacting standards. But Marcus's playing reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. Marcus began building toward the finale, and everyone in the room sensed it. The energy intensified, pulling them all toward a shared climax. He played about transformation, about how pain and struggle could forge something beautiful if you refused to let them destroy you. His hands moved with increasing speed and power, the piano responding like an extension of his body. The woman in the silver dress, who had laughed at him so cruelly earlier, covered her mouth with her hand. She felt ashamed of her behavior, recognizing that she had become the kind of person who mocked others to feel superior. The music held up a mirror, and she didn't like what she saw reflected back. Marcus's playing reached a passionate intensity that made the air vibrate. He poured everything into these final moments, every ounce of determination, every fragment of hope, every lesson learned through hardship. The music became a declaration, a refusal to be silenced, a celebration of survival and growth. Sarah, the young woman who had abandoned her violin, made a decision. She would start playing again. Life was too short to ignore the things that made her feel alive. Marcus's courage inspired her own. The melody soared higher, complex and beautiful, demanding everything from the pianist and offering everything in return. Marcus's face showed the physical strain, sweat beading on his forehead, but his expression held pure joy. This was why he played. This connection, this communication that bypassed words and went straight to the heart. Marcus's fingers flew across the keys with breathtaking speed and precision. The finale demanded everything from him technically and emotionally, and he gave it willingly. The music cascaded through the ballroom like a force of nature, impossible to resist or ignore. Every person present felt swept up in its current. The composition reached its peak, a moment of such intense beauty that several guests gasped audibly. Marcus played about transcendence, about those rare instances when humans touch something larger than themselves. His hands created harmonies that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical realm, as if the piano itself had been waiting its entire existence to produce these exact sounds. Then, with exquisite control, Marcus began to bring the piece toward its conclusion. The volume decreased gradually, but the intensity remained. He played softer and softer, drawing the audience into an intimate space. The music spoke about peace found after struggle, wisdom earned through experience, the quiet satisfaction of staying true to yourself despite opposition. The final notes fell like gentle rain, each one precious and deliberate. Marcus let them linger in the air, sustaining the pedal to allow the sound to fade naturally. When he finally lifted his hands from the keyboard and the last vibration died away, the ballroom remained absolutely silent. The silence stretched for several seconds. Marcus opened his eyes slowly, almost afraid to face whatever reaction awaited him. His heart hammered in his chest. His hands trembled slightly from exertion and emotion. He had given everything he had, holding nothing back, and now he felt completely exposed. Then the applause began. It started with Robert Thornhill, the classical musician, who rose to his feet and clapped with genuine enthusiasm. Others immediately followed. Within moments, the entire ballroom was standing, applauding thunderously. The sound washed over Marcus like a wave, and he sat frozen at the piano, struggling to process what was happening. People weren't just clapping politely. They were cheering, some with tears streaming down their faces. The woman in the silver dress applauded so hard her hands turned red, her earlier mockery replaced by awe. Derek, the venture capitalist, stood with his mouth slightly open, shaking his head in disbelief at what he had just witnessed. Sarah rushed forward, still crying, and grabbed Marcus's hand when he finally stood up. She thanked him through her tears, though she couldn't articulate exactly what she was thanking him for. She just knew that something fundamental had shifted inside her, and this stranger's courage had made it possible. Victoria Ashworth approached with an expression Marcus had never seen on her polished face. Genuine emotion, she took both his hands in hers and apologized, her voice thick with feeling. She said she had been wrong to suggest he stop playing, wrong to judge him by superficial standards. She admitted that she had forgotten what real artistry looked like until he reminded her. Robert Thornhill waited his turn, then introduced himself. Marcus recognized the name immediately and felt his knees go weak. This was one of his musical heroes, someone he had studied and admired for years. Thornhill told Marcus that he had rare gift, not just technical skill but something much more valuable, the ability to communicate truth through music. The conductor from New York pushed through the crowd, already talking about opportunities. He wanted Marcus to perform with his orchestra. He mentioned prestigious venues, recording contracts, connections that could change everything. Marcus listened in a daze, unable to fully believe this was real. Other guests surrounded him, each wanting to share how the music had affected them. A businessman confessed that Marcus had reminded him why he started his company, back when it was about passion rather than profit. A lawyer said the performance made her reconsider her priorities. A teacher thanked him for demonstrating what genuine excellence looked like. Derek approached last, looking uncomfortable but determined. He offered a genuine apology for his earlier behavior. He admitted that he had judged Marcus based on appearances, assuming that someone without wealth or connections couldn't possibly have real talent. The performance had challenged his entire worldview, forcing him to confront his own prejudices and shallow values. Marcus accepted the apology graciously, though he felt overwhelmed by all the attention. He had entered this evening hoping to make a good impression and earn some recognition. He had endured humiliation and dismissal, but then he had made a choice to play authentically, and everything changed. Victoria insisted he stay for dinner, placing him at the main table beside Robert Thornhill and other influential guests. Throughout the meal, people kept approaching to congratulate him or share their reactions to his performance. His phone, which he had silenced for the evening, buzzed constantly with messages as word spread on social media. Someone had recorded the final portion of his performance and posted it online. The video was already being shared widely, with comments pouring in from around the world. Strangers who had never met Marcus described being moved to tears by the brief clip. Musicians praised his technique and emotional depth. Music schools asked about his training. Marcus excused himself at one point, needing a moment alone to process everything. He stepped onto a terrace overlooking the estate's gardens. The night air was cool against his flushed face. He pulled out his phone and called his parents, his voice shaking as he tried to explain what had happened. His mother cried with joy. His father kept saying he always knew Marcus had something special. They made him promise to come straight home after the event, so he could tell them everything in person. Marcus agreed, wiping his own tears, overwhelmed by gratitude for their constant support. When he returned inside, Robert Thornhill pulled him aside for a private conversation. The older musician spoke seriously about the responsibilities that came with Marcus's talent. He warned that success could be as challenging as obscurity, that the music industry would try to shape him into something marketable rather than authentic. He urged Marcus to protect the honesty that made his playing so powerful. Marcus listened carefully, absorbing the wisdom from someone who had navigated this world for decades. Thornhill offered to mentor him, to help him develop his career while maintaining his artistic integrity. It was an incredible opportunity, the kind most musicians could only dream about receiving. The evening continued with multiple guests offering various opportunities. A music producer wanted to discuss an album. A festival organizer invited him to perform at a major event. A university professor suggested he consider teaching. Marcus collected business cards and contact information, his head spinning with possibilities. The weeks following the gala passed in a blur of activity that left Marcus breathless. His life transformed overnight in ways he had never imagined possible. The video of his performance went viral, accumulating millions of views across various platforms. News outlets picked up the story, fascinated by the narrative of an underestimated self-taught pianist who silenced his critics through one stunning performance. Marcus received hundreds of emails daily. Concert halls wanted to book him. Music labels competed for his signature. Journalists requested interviews. But amid the chaos, Marcus tried to stay grounded. He continued living with his parents, still practicing at the community center where his journey began, though now reporters sometimes showed up to photograph him there. Robert Thornhill proved invaluable during this transition. The experienced musician helped Marcus navigate the complex world of contracts and agents, protecting him from predatory deals that promised much but delivered little. Thornhill introduced him to trustworthy people in the industry, building a team around Marcus that had his best interests at heart. Sarah, the young woman from the gala, reached out through social media. She had indeed started playing violin again and wanted to thank him personally. They met for coffee, and she shared how his performance had created a ripple effect in her life. She had quit her unsatisfying corporate job and was now teaching music to underprivileged children while pursuing her own artistic projects. Marcus felt moved knowing his courage had inspired someone else's transformation. Marcus's first major performance after the gala took place at Seattle's renowned concert hall. The venue sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. On the night of the concert, he stood backstage feeling the familiar butterflies in his stomach. But this time, he wasn't worried about impressing anyone or proving his worth. He simply wanted to share his music honestly. His parents sat in the front row dressed in their finest clothes, barely able to contain their pride. The community center staff attended as honored guests. Even some people from his neighborhood made the trip, wanting to support the kid they had watched grow up. When Marcus walked onto the stage and saw all these faces, people who had known him before the fame, he felt tears prick his eyes. He performed the same composition that had changed everything at the gala, but also premiered several new pieces he had written. The audience responded with standing ovations after each one. Critics in attendance wrote glowing reviews, praising not just his technical ability, but the emotional authenticity that made his playing so compelling. After the concert, Marcus hosted a small gathering at the community center. While he could have chosen an upscale venue, he wanted to celebrate where it all began. He played for the children who came to afternoon programs, showing them that dreams could come true with dedication and courage. He set up a scholarship fund to provide music lessons for kids whose families couldn't afford them. The recording contract came next. Marcus signed with an independent label that gave him creative control over his music. He spent months in the studio, working with talented engineers and musicians who respected his vision. The resulting album featured his original compositions along with unique interpretations of classical pieces. He named it One More Song in honor of the decision that changed his life. When the album released, it debuted on several charts. Classical music critics praised it as a breath of fresh air in a genre often criticized for being stale. Younger listeners discovered classical music through Marcus's accessible yet sophisticated approach. He appeared on talk shows and podcasts, always humble and gracious, never forgetting the struggles that shaped him. Derek, the venture capitalist who had mocked him, became an unexpected supporter. He reached out privately and asked to invest in Marcus's career, not as a business transaction but as a way to make amends. Marcus politely declined the money but suggested Derek could sponsor music education programs instead. Derek agreed and became a major donor to arts initiatives in underserved communities. Victoria Ashworth invited Marcus back for her next gala, this time as the guest of honor rather than background entertainment. She had learned from their initial encounter, recognizing how her own prejudices had almost caused her to miss witnessing something extraordinary. She used her platform to promote emerging artists who might otherwise be overlooked. But success brought challenges too. The constant demands on Marcus's time felt overwhelming. Everyone wanted a piece of him, wanting performances, interviews, collaborations, appearances. He struggled to find time for the quiet practice sessions that had always been his sanctuary. The pressure to maintain his sudden success created anxiety he had never experienced before. Robert Thornhill noticed Marcus struggling and intervened. He reminded the young pianist that protecting his artistic soul was more important than capitalizing on every opportunity. Together they created boundaries, limiting performances and commitments to sustainable levels. Thornhill shared stories about musicians who burned out from saying yes to everything, losing their passion in the process. Marcus took this advice seriously. He started declining offers that didn't align with his values or that would stretch him too thin. He insisted on maintaining regular visits to his parents and practice time at the community center. He refused to let fame change his fundamental nature, or disconnect him from the experiences that made his music authentic. A documentary crew approached him about filming his journey. Initially resistant, Marcus agreed when they promised to focus on the broader themes of perseverance and self-belief, rather than just his personal story. The resulting film featured interviews with his family, the community center staff, Sarah, and others whose lives he had touched. It won awards at several film festivals and inspired countless viewers. Marcus used his growing platform to advocate for music education. He testified before the school board about the importance of arts programs. He performed at fundraisers for organizations fighting to keep music in schools. He wrote opinion pieces about how music had saved him, given him purpose, taught him discipline and self-expression. His relationship with his parents deepened. With his earnings, he paid off their mortgage and his father's medical debts. He bought them a comfortable house in a safe neighborhood. But more than the material support, they treasured the time he made for them despite his busy schedule. He never forgot who had sacrificed for his dreams when he had nothing to offer in return. The young professionals from the gala who had initially dismissed Marcus each had their own reckonings. The woman in the silver dress wrote him a letter apologizing in detail, explaining how that evening had forced her to examine her treatment of others. Several people mentioned that witnessing his triumph had inspired them to pursue their own abandoned passions. Marcus began teaching a small group of students, carefully selected kids who showed genuine passion for music, regardless of their financial circumstances. He remembered how crucial guidance would have been in his own journey and wanted to provide what he never had. His teaching style emphasized emotional honesty alongside technical skill, encouraging students to find their unique voices. Marcus stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, adjusting his bow tie with trembling fingers. 2 years had passed since that transformative evening at Victoria Ashworth's gala, and now he was about to perform on one of the world's most prestigious stages. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had gone from being dismissed as background noise to headlining a venue where legends performed. The stage manager gave him a reassuring smile, sensing his nerves. Marcus closed his eyes and took deep breaths, trying to center himself. He could hear the murmur of the sold-out crowd beyond the curtain. Music critics from major publications sat in the audience. His parents had flown to New York for this moment. Robert Thornhill was there, as was Sarah, who now performed professionally with a regional orchestra. But as the announcement came and applause rippled through the hall, Marcus felt something unexpected: fear. Not stage fright exactly, but a deeper worry that success might have changed him in ways he didn't recognize. Had he remained true to the musician who played that final song at the gala? Or had he become someone performing for approval rather than expressing truth? He walked onto the stage and the applause swelled. The piano waited under the spotlight, a magnificent instrument that had been played by countless masters. Marcus sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. Then he paused, remembering something Robert Thornhill had told him. "The moment you start playing for applause rather than truth," Thornhill had said, "is the moment you lose what made you special." Marcus looked out at the vast audience and made a choice. He wouldn't play the crowd-pleasing program his publicist had recommended. Instead, he would play what he felt, what mattered. He began with a new composition he had written just weeks earlier, a piece so personal he had been afraid to share it publicly. The music started quietly, almost uncertainly. It spoke about the isolation that sometimes came with success, the way fame could create distance between him and the simple joy of making music. Some audience members shifted in their seats, perhaps expecting something more immediately impressive, but Marcus continued, trusting his instincts. As the piece developed, it explored the complexity of his journey. The melody acknowledged gratitude for opportunities, while questioning whether external validation could ever fill internal doubts. His fingers found patterns that expressed the strange disconnect between his outer success and inner struggles. The music was vulnerable in a way that made some people uncomfortable, but that vulnerability was exactly what connected with others. A young musician in the balcony felt tears forming, recognizing his own fears reflected in the sound. An older woman remembered her own artistic compromises, choices she made for security rather than passion. The music asked difficult questions without providing easy answers. Marcus played about pressure, the weight of expectations that grew heavier with each achievement. He played about comparison, the toxic habit of measuring himself against other musicians rather than his own progress. The composition moved through darker emotions than his earlier work, showing that success didn't erase struggle but simply changed its form. Then something shifted in the music. Hope emerged, but not the naive optimism of his younger self. This was harder-won wisdom, the understanding that growth required accepting both light and shadow. Marcus played about learning to be gentle with himself, to recognize that being human meant being imperfect. The melody transformed, becoming more confident without losing its honesty. He played about finding balance, about protecting creative space while engaging with the world's demands. His technique was flawless, but technique served emotion rather than showcasing itself. Every note had purpose. Marcus transitioned into a second piece, this one dedicated to his parents. The music captured their quiet strength, their unwavering support, the countless small sacrifices they made without seeking recognition. The melody was tender and grateful, expressing love that words couldn't contain. His mother, sitting in the audience, pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. His father squeezed her hand, his own vision blurred with tears. They had never imagined their son would perform in Carnegie Hall, but they had always believed in his gift. The music thanked them for that belief. The concert continued through several more pieces, each one revealing different facets of Marcus's journey and growth. He played about friendship, specifically his relationship with Sarah, whose own renewal had inspired him. He played about mentorship, honoring Robert Thornhill's guidance. He played about community, remembering the neighborhood that shaped him. Between pieces, Marcus spoke briefly to the audience, sharing stories about his path. He talked about the humiliation at the gala, not dwelling on it but acknowledging how that moment forced a crucial choice. He described deciding to play authentically even when rejection seemed certain, and how that decision changed everything. His honesty resonated with the audience. They weren't just listening to a talented musician anymore. They were connecting with a real person who shared their struggles and hopes. The atmosphere in the hall became intimate despite the vast space and large crowd. For his final piece, Marcus chose to play the composition from the gala, the one that had launched everything. But it had evolved since then. He had refined it, deepened it, added layers of meaning earned through 2 years of experiences. It was both familiar and completely new. The audience recognized it from the viral video, and excitement rippled through the hall. But as Marcus played, they discovered this wasn't a simple recreation of that moment. This version acknowledged how much had changed, how success brought its own complications, how the journey continued beyond any single triumph. The music built toward its climax, and Marcus felt himself returning to that essential truth he had discovered at the gala. External circumstances might change, but the core remained constant. Music was his way of speaking truth, of connecting, of making meaning. As long as he protected that, everything else would find its place. The final notes rang out through Carnegie Hall, and Marcus held the last chord, letting it fade naturally. When silence fell, he sat motionless for a moment, knowing he had given everything he had. Whatever the reaction, he had stayed true to himself. The applause that followed was thunderous. People jumped to their feet immediately, clapping and cheering with genuine enthusiasm. Critics who came prepared to write measured reviews found themselves swept up in the emotion. This wasn't just an excellent performance. It was a reminder of why music mattered. 5 years after the Carnegie Hall performance, Marcus Chen sat in the same community center where his journey began. The old upright piano had been replaced with a better instrument, donated by an anonymous benefactor who turned out to be Victoria Ashworth. But the room felt the same, filled with the chatter of children waiting for their afternoon music lessons. Marcus had achieved more than he ever dreamed possible. He had performed in concert halls across the world. His albums won awards. He had collaborated with renowned orchestras and musicians. Major media outlets featured his story as an example of perseverance and authenticity. But today, teaching a shy 12-year-old girl how to find emotion in simple scales, he felt most like himself. The girl, named Maya, reminded him of his younger self. She came from a family that struggled financially but supported her passion. She practiced on a keyboard at home, dreaming of becoming a real pianist someday. Marcus saw his own hunger and determination reflected in her focused expression as she tried to perfect a difficult passage. "Don't just play the notes," Marcus said gently, sitting beside her. "Feel what they mean. What do you want to say with this music? Maya thought for a moment, then played the passage again. This time something shifted. The mechanical repetition became expression. Her face lit up with surprise and joy at the difference she heard. Marcus smiled, remembering his own discovery that music was a language capable of communicating what words couldn't. His phone buzzed with a message from Robert Thornhill, now retired but still a constant presence in Marcus's life. The old musician was checking in before Marcus's evening lecture at the university. Over the years, Marcus had become an advocate for arts education, speaking at schools and conferences about the transformative power of music. After Maya's lesson ended and her mother collected her, Marcus walked through the neighborhood. Things had changed here too. The area had improved economically, partly due to attention from Marcus's success story. New businesses opened. Community programs received more funding. But the essential character remained: people looking out for each other, families working hard to build better futures. He stopped by his parents' house, a tradition he maintained despite his busy schedule. His mother had dinner ready, insisting he needed home-cooked meals even though he could afford restaurants. His father, now healthier and semi-retired, asked about Marcus's upcoming projects with genuine interest and pride that never faded. They talked about the music school Marcus had founded, which provided free lessons to talented students regardless of their financial situation. The school had graduated its first class, several students earning scholarships to prestigious conservatories. Marcus's vision was expanding, with plans to open branches in other cities. During dinner, his mother mentioned she had run into the mother of a kid who used to tease Marcus about his dedication to music. That kid now worked a job he hated, complaining about how his life hadn't turned out as he expected. Marcus felt no satisfaction in this comparison. He understood that everyone walked their own path, faced their own challenges. "I was lucky," Marcus said quietly. "Lucky that I found something I loved. Lucky that people gave me chances. Lucky that one moment of courage opened doors." His father shook his head. "It wasn't just luck. You worked harder than anyone I've ever seen. You kept going when others would have quit. You stayed humble when success could have changed you." Later that evening, Marcus delivered his lecture at the university. The auditorium was packed with students, aspiring musicians eager to hear his insights. But instead of talking about technique or career strategies, Marcus focused on something else entirely. "The music industry will tell you that success means fame, awards, and sold-out concerts," he said. "And those things are wonderful when they happen. But real success is simpler. It's playing music that matters to you. It's staying honest even when dishonesty might be more profitable. It's remembering why you started." He shared the story of the gala, a story many in the audience already knew but still found inspiring. But he added new details about what came after: the struggles with pressure and expectations, the moments when he questioned everything, the constant work required to maintain authenticity in an industry that often rewarded shallow spectacle over substance. "That night at the gala," Marcus explained, "I made a choice. I could leave humiliated, or I could play one more song for myself. That choice changed my life. But you know what? I have to make that same choice again and again. Every time I perform, every time I compose, I choose whether to play for applause or play for truth." A student asked how he dealt with criticism and failure despite his success. Marcus appreciated the honest question. He explained that failure never stopped, it just changed form. He talked about performances that didn't connect with audiences, compositions that fell flat, reviews that stung despite his accomplishments. "The difference now," he said, "is that I measure success differently. If I play honestly and someone doesn't connect with it, that's okay. I'd rather touch one person authentically than impress thousands superficially." After the lecture, students lined up to speak with him. He took time with each one, offering encouragement and advice. He saw himself in their hopeful faces, remembered how desperately he had wanted guidance when starting out. If his experience could help even one of them navigate their journey, the time was well spent. Sarah met him afterward for coffee, a regular ritual when their schedules aligned. She had built a successful career as a violinist and music educator, often collaborating with Marcus on various projects. They talked about their upcoming joint concert benefiting music education programs. "Do you ever think about that night?" Sarah asked. "The gala," Marcus nodded. "All the time. Not because it made me famous, but because it taught me something crucial. The moment I stopped worrying about their judgment and played for myself, everything changed. That's a lesson I have to remember constantly. They discussed how success created new pressures, new ways to lose yourself if you weren't careful. The industry constantly pushed for commercial decisions over artistic ones. Staying true to your vision required vigilance and courage, not just once, but continuously. Walking home later, Marcus passed the fancy hotel where Victoria Ashworth's gala had taken place. He paused, looking up at the building. So much had changed since that night. But in essential ways, he remained the same person who chose to play one final song despite humiliation and rejection. He thought about all the musicians who never got their breakthrough moment, whose talent went unrecognized despite being equally deserving. He knew his success involved timing, luck, and circumstances beyond just his ability. That awareness kept him humble and motivated him to create opportunities for others. Marcus arrived home at the modest apartment he maintained, despite being able to afford luxury. He sat at his piano, not the one from the community center, but a beautiful grand piano he had purchased after his first major paycheck. He played quietly, not practicing for any performance, just exploring ideas and emotions. This was why he played. Not for applause or recognition, though those were gratifying. He played because music allowed him to process life, to express what words couldn't capture, to connect with something larger than himself. Everything else, all the success and opportunities, flowed from this fundamental truth. His phone showed messages from various people. Victoria Ashworth asking about his availability for a charity concert. The conductor from New York proposing a new collaboration. A journalist requesting an interview. Derek, the former critic who became an ally, sharing news about the music programs he now supported. Marcus would respond to them all eventually. But right now he simply played, his fingers finding melodies that spoke about gratitude, growth, and the ongoing journey of staying true to yourself. The music filled his apartment, a private performance for an audience of one. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But tonight, Marcus Chen was simply a pianist who loved music, playing one more song.